Welcome and good morning. For some of you dialing in from the Philippines, I see good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar session. It's the second webinar within the discussion series of the International EbACommunity of Practice on the topics evidence on the effectiveness of ecosystem-based adaptation. And today's session will discuss the topic Valuating and Communicating the Economic Benefits of EbA. So let's have a look on today's agenda. The first input will be from Lucy Emerton on economic tools for counting, capturing and investing in ecosystems as climate adaptation infrastructure. Very much looking forward to it. And then we have an input, a practical case from Thailand on evaluating economic benefits of EbA in Thailand. EbA is sediment trap compared to dredging. And then we focus on how to communicate on EbA evidences. And there's an input from Susanna Tall from Wetlands International on communicating building with nature for coastal resilience. Well, I'm Alexandra Köngeta. I'm working in a BMUB IKI-financed project on mainstream EbA for GIZ, which is implemented by GIZ, and I will guide you through today's session. Before we start with the presentations, just some remarks on the housekeeping. I will mute your microphones during the sessions to avoid noises in the line. And well, if you want to engage in the discussions, feel free to use, to lift your hand. You can see there's a sign on the left-hand side. You can just test it right now if you wish. So you can lift your hands, you can agree or disagree. Yeah, thank you. I see some hands lifted, and there's a chat function, so you can ask questions to all of us. You can select this. There's a box, and below it says all, or just to a single person. And yeah, this is the way how you could engage in the discussion. And with this, I will ask Lucy to switch on her microphone for the first presentation. Thank you, Lucy.
Hi, everybody. It's really nice to, well, not to see you, but to be with you over the webinar. I'm in Arizona at the moment, so I'm right at the other end of the time scale. What I'd like to do is actually just kick off by looking at the economic side of things. And where I'd like to start that is to think about the whole issue of infrastructure costs and benefits. Because I believe, as an economist, and in the light of a lot of the work that I've done on adaptation, a lot of what we're doing is actually trying to look at the effectiveness of different types of infrastructure to meet different types of goals. And in a way, when we're looking at least at economic benefits and an economic perspective, a lot of what drives our work is to say, look, if we're looking at evidence of the effectiveness of EbA from an economics perspective, we actually need to start counting ecosystems as a key part of climate adaptation infrastructure. But we don't just need to count them as a part of that infrastructure. Our evidence of effectiveness also has to capture those ecosystem values, and it has to invest in them. And why? I think the reason for that, and the reason for the emphasis on the economic evidence of the effectiveness of EbA, is that traditionally economists like myself have taken a horribly narrow view. What's the tendency to do? We focus only on the very direct costs and benefits of adaptation options. How much does the capital cost? What are the maintenance costs? How much is the labour? What are the benefits in terms of direct outputs? And we just don't factor ecosystem values into the calculations. When we're looking at the profitability of different options, when we're choosing between different types of infrastructure, it's really not surprising that ecosystem-based approaches haven't been selected often aren't treated as the most equitable or sustainable or cost-effective adaptation options because these costs and benefits are undervalued, because ecosystems are left out of the equation, because ecosystems aren't, from an economics perspective, treated as a key part of adaptation infrastructure. And that, I think, is where we come in with all this wealth of work on making the economic and business case for ecosystem-based adaptation, making the economic and business case for investing in ecosystems as a key part of adaptation infrastructure. And I know we're going to hear some really nice examples of that from Thailand and then from Wetland International. I just want to give a couple of cases, a couple from Africa and a couple from Asia, of successful examples of using economic valuation to make the economic case for EbA. My first one is from Cameroon. It concerns a large floodplain in the north of Cameroon, the Ouarzelagoon floodplain, which in the 1970s was effectively cut off from its water supply because of a large-scale irrigation scheme. In the face of climate change, in the face of changing weather patterns, changing temperature, changing ecological patterns, this has started to pose a really critical threat to local livelihoods in terms of resilience, in terms of adaptation, in terms of ability to survive. And so here the challenge was to demonstrate to the Ministry of Finance and to the development donors that investing in a mix of grey and green measures to engineer the irrigation scheme back to a flood release situation and also to invest in ecosystem restoration should actually qualify for a poverty reduction loan targeted at promoting adaptation infrastructure. You can see the situation here. The Ouarzelagoon floodplain is right in the extreme north of Cameroon. It's fed by the Lagoon River. About half of the area is inundated. And once the downstream irrigation scheme was built, this inundated area shrunk to about half its former size, to about 2,000 square kilometres. So the challenge was to say, look, it is worth investing in grey and green infrastructure options to restore the floodplain ecology, restore the flooding regime, and thereby contribute towards livelihood restoration, adaptation, and resilience. So to take the numbers to show that not only would this option generate a positive return on investment, but actually it would be a very cost-effective way of enhancing adaptation in the area. That was actually successful. The evidence there was very successful, and what happened was a loan was secured and grant funding was secured to engage in these works and to start to restore the floodplain. A second example, because I want to give examples from very different contexts, is from Indonesia, and it's actually an example of a company, a very large Japanese insurance company, which has a very active program in investing in mangrove restoration and rehabilitation for adaptation, for community livelihoods. And this is not to directly benefit the company, but it is deliberately selected because of the principle that investing in coastal ecosystem restoration has a big impact in managing the impacts of climate change in terms of erosion, extreme weather effects, storm damage, which ultimately impacts on the insurance sector's profits. So these investments have been deliberately chosen by the company, but both the company management and the shareholders were very unconvinced that this was a good social investment for the company to be making. And so here the economic case was very much revolving around the cost side, that actually it's much cheaper to invest in grey-green measures and ecosystem-based adaptation as a means of managing extreme weather events than it is to just rely solely on engineered options. You can see the annualized costs of mangrove restoration of and is this marine insurance company actually increased its budget. And my last example is from Malawi, and this is a very classic example that a lot of us in the development conservation world work in, and this is making the case for a big investment program. It's in Malawi's Shire Basin, an area that's highly vulnerable to the effects of climate change. Land degradation is exacerbating these effects and increasing resilience. And here the challenge was to demonstrate and to justify that an investment plan in forest and agricultural-based adaptation measures would actually be to the benefit of the country. On the one hand, this becomes a little bit more sophisticated than previous options, because on the one hand this was a case of demonstrating that the gains from the two EbA options of agriculture and forestry, the two green bars on the right of the screen, would be much higher than failing to take action or relying on non-ecosystem-based measures, the brown and orange bars on the left of the screen, for farmers, in terms of the on-site direct benefits of improving soil fertility, managing erosion, temperature and water stress as they impact on crop values, but also showing for key off-site users there were considerable co-benefits of taking forestry and agricultural-based, ecosystem-based adaptation measures to the water users, to the electricity consumers, the irrigated farmers, the water supply utilities and hydropower producers. So that overall, if you're looking at the bankability of EbA to the Malawi to poor farmers or large downstream water users, there's a considerable value added and costs avoided from EbA. So three very classic cases of presenting the economic evidence and using economic valuation to make the business case. Fundamentally, all three of those are to do with ensuring that rather than leaving the ecosystem values out of the equation, they're actually factored into the calculations to determine the best uses of land and resources and funds. Okay, I mean, I think that's good. I think that's important. I think that's something we need to do. But as we talk about the evidence of the effectiveness of EbA, I think we have to ask, so what? If we're looking at economic evidence, so what if we have these big numbers to do with giving this economic evidence of high values? However great we demonstrate these benefits to be, convinced decision makers are that it's in the public interest to adopt EbA approaches, actually it means very little unless the economic opportunities and drivers that influence how people act in the real world change, and unless the people who actually are responsible for managing the ecosystems that are part of these solutions perceive there to be sufficient gains from doing so. And I think we have a problem. We conventionally have tended to focus on just generating evidence of big numbers, and it's not the big numbers that are issue. We've got to move beyond valuation. What the important thing is to say, you know, your benefits are only one side of the equation. We can't just look at evidence in terms of big numbers of EbA benefits. We also have to look at the costs. We have to look at the bottom line of the economic impact of EbA in combination with or in contrast to grey adaptation measures. And not only that, but the real thing we have to look at is a distribution of these costs and benefits. It doesn't matter how big the gains are, it doesn't matter how big the economic evidence of the effectiveness is, but actually, typically, these costs and benefits are very unequally distributed. Many people may gain from EbA, they may be a huge net benefit, but actually you're incurring costs. And typically the costs are being incurred to the people who are least able to bear them. the local communities who are responsible for maintaining the ecosystems, and the government environment authorities. And not only is that inequitable, but it's also unsustainable. And what we actually need to be looking at, if we're generating evidence, is generating evidence for those people who are bearing the costs and who will sustain the measures. We need to look at where there are imbalances, where there are uncaptured values or uncompensated costs or unrewarded actions, and ask ourselves what kind of instruments can we use to actually capture those values, redistribute those costs and benefits, secure adequate incentives and finance. And so as I get into the last few slides, I just want to give my final example of the kind of economic thinking that really we need to follow through on when we're looking at economic evidence of the effectiveness of EbA. And this is an example from the Tool River Basin in Mongolia. Apologies to Farid, who's held this example so many times before. The Tool River Basin is basically the river that supplies Ulaanbaatar, the capital city. There's substantial climate change impacts affecting the water security of Ulaanbaatar, combined with rising demand for water, and there's a chronic water crisis. So there's a major grey infrastructure investment programme going on in the face of climate change and to enhance adaptive capacity. But the question here was, how do we put ecosystems in alongside the grey infrastructure? Because if we don't look at protecting the watershed, then the grey measures by themselves are going to be very hard to sustain. Well, that was really looking at, we have Ulaanbaatar, we have the Tool River coming down, we have the grey measures in the city, but we also have the watershed. And in the watershed ecosystem, we have two national parks which overlap the critical areas in terms of maintaining downstream water flow and water quality. So it's a case of saying, evidence of, given the growth in water demand, what are the consequences of ecosystem degradation in the upper Tool? What are the consequences of gradual deterioration? What are the benefits of conserving the ecosystem and helping adaptation? What do these mean in terms of offsetting the water crisis? And what is the economic evidence of the return in investment in terms of water sector adaptation? Here, the economic evidence was basically your return on investment is every $1 invested in upper catchment conservation as part of the water sector adaptation measures, and alongside the grey measures will actually generate $15 of water benefits. But that's why I'm saying the story doesn't stop there. Of course it's in the public interest to factor green approaches based on watershed ecosystem conservation into the infrastructure investment plan. Of course it is. You know, we've got here about $43 million of downstream benefits. But the reality is the herders who live in the upper Tool ecosystem bear the opportunity costs of that by restricting their lands and resource uses. And it's not in their interests. They don't gain particularly from the water security. And the protected areas who manage those the authorities who manage those protected areas just don't have the budget. So you've got a classic situation where you've got a huge adaptation service being provided to water consumers in Ulaanbaatar, but nothing going back. And that's where we need to look at the solutions and the evidence of how we can deal with it. In this case, the solution was to say, we actually have to look at redistributing and capturing those ecosystem values via an ecosystem service payment scheme. So we actually link the water beneficiaries with the EbA providers. Via the water bills, a levy is collected by the Water Supply and Sewerage Department, it's put into a fund, and then it's distributed via budget transfers and rural banks to the people who actually provide those services. And this scheme basically is something that the design came out of the economic values and evidence that were presented and is now in the process of being set in place. And I think that's where I want to end, by just making the point and emphasising my main argument, which is the growing use of economic valuation and economic evidence is a major step forward. We do need to make the economic case for evidence of the effectiveness of EbA, but actually our challenge now is to think in a joined up manner. We need to go beyond just demonstrating these big numbers and say, what do they mean? How do we capture these values? How do we distribute them? How do we actually get the incentives and finance which will serve to stimulate and sustain these investments? Because that's also a key part of the evidence. So thank you very much indeed for your attention. I'm now going to go back to the mainstream, and I've got a horrible feeling you couldn't see my screen. Could you all see my screen okay? Yes, hopefully you could.
Okay, thank you very much, Lucy, for this very interesting presentation. And I think we have the time right now for some questions. And so for those who joined a bit later, you can you have a chat box on the left-hand side, and your questions are welcome there, or you can lift your hand and I will switch on your microphone and you can ask directly. So yeah. There's, are there any questions to know? I don't see any hands. Yeah. There's one question from Matthias. I will read it out loud. Many thanks, Lucy. Do you have some more information on how these facts and figures were presented to decision makers from government and private sector? And how was the information taken up by them, and did it change decision-making processes, for example, incentive setting?
Yes, and I can also see a question from Dolores as well, which I'll move on to next, after answering that one. Yeah, no, Matthias, that's a really important issue, because I think the point is also you can have the best figures and the best technical studies in the world, but actually if they're not credible and relevant and acceptable decision makers, I think we've all been in this situation, they're not going to make a change. I think what really made the case in all of these examples, the Malawi one, the Mongolia one, the Indonesia one, and the Cameroon one, was that a lot of money was invested, well, not necessarily a lot of money, a lot of time and effort was invested in A, involving local stakeholders and decision makers in the process, B, communicating the results to them, and C, actually taking the trouble before starting the studies to look at what kind of evidence was needed. And I think that's actually what led to the fact that those were successful cases in changing policy and decision making. Actually, all of those studies have been written up as little case studies under GIZ's Value project. And if you search the aboutvalues.net website, you'll find a bunch of 2-page case study examples, and you can read a little bit more about that more sort of political economy side of how we used the evidence to actually make change. Matthias, does that answer your question okay? Hopefully it does. Dolores.
And he's smiling, so I think it's fine.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Dolores, yes, Dolores, you're from the Philippines. Are you from the Philippines?
Yes, she is.
Yes, okay, where you've got some actually really good examples of valuation. How do you put a value to clean air due to EbA measures? With great difficulty. I'd say the most obvious valuation method would be damage costs avoided. So with clean air, particularly what are the health benefits, what are the health costs avoided, what are the losses in productivity, the medical expenditures and so on, which are changing. And there's some good examples, you can Google them, of the World Bank having applied those approaches, not in Asia to the best of my knowledge, but they did a series of studies in North Africa and the Middle East, and they've got some good methodologies in there. And the other way to look at that would also be a cost-based approach, which would be to look at what would be the expenditures or the money you'd have to spend on mitigating the air pollution. Because if you're getting clean air due to EbA, in a way you're saving those costs of mitigation measures, of cleaning up the air, or of putting in place public health measures to manage lung problems and other things. Hopefully, Dolores, that answered your question okay.
Okay. There's another question, I will read it out. Does size of catchment matter in PES transaction? And what are your observations?
I mean, okay, of course, it's always context specific. It varies. I think sometimes it does. And I think where size of catchment does matter in PES is in a very small catchment, it's often difficult to find sufficient ecosystem service beneficiaries to generate enough payment to make the scheme worthwhile. So if you've got a very tiny basin, you have so few people paying that actually it's not necessarily covering its costs. On the other hand, just to contradict myself, which I often do, with a very large catchment, things can get really, really complicated. You have so many land users and ecosystem managers and so many ecosystem service beneficiaries that you have to have a very complicated scheme to make sure that you actually collect the money or the benefits from all the beneficiaries and distribute it to all the ecosystem managers. So I'd say that probably in practical terms, your optimum size of catchment is a middle-sized one, which has enough beneficiaries to generate a good flow of funding, but does not have so many stakeholders and players that the transaction costs become untenable.
Thank you, Lucy, for this. I think there was another question, last one, from Yaruvan, and the question is, thank you, Lucy, any ideas about possible incentives for adaptation infrastructure?
Thanks, Yaruvan. Yes. I mean, yes and no. My answer are always yes and no, aren't they? That's very bad. I sound like a politician. Yes, again, I think the thing is it's highly context specific. So if we're talking about, very often if we're talking about incentives for EbA, actually what we're looking at is incentives for particular land or resource management options, or incentives for sectors that depend and invest in grey infrastructure to invest also in green measures. So I think for the first one, where we're actually looking at incentives and finance for the communities and land managers in key ecosystems for adaptation, I think market-based mechanisms that provide funding flows, like payment for environmental services, can be very effective. Other financial mechanisms or fiscal mechanisms that maybe work with reducing taxes or giving tax holidays or saving people costs or giving them subsidies or credit can also be really important. But I think it's really important also that we remember that money's not everything. And that makes me think of some of the work that we've been doing with GIZ in Vietnam and Thailand, where actually local ecosystem managers have said, no, it's not money that's going to stimulate us to change our land use practices or our adaptation buy-in. It's other things. It's information. It's a sense of public interest and so on. So I think that. And then I think on the other side, maybe we also have to think about giving the big infrastructure developers, infrastructure managers, infrastructure funders and investors incentives to invest in EbA. And there, I think we really need to start pressurizing decision makers and ministries of finance to give the same investment incentives for EbA that they give for grey infrastructure. If I'm going to invest in construction, I can get tax holidays, I can get import duty exemption, I can get all kinds of preferential treatment and credit. If I want to invest in ecosystem-based adaptation, I don't get that. And so automatically, I'm lacking an incentive. So there's many more, but those are just some sort of off-the-cuff ideas.
Okay, thank you very much, Lucy. I see there are some more questions. I would just take one more. Sorry for the others. I think we could perhaps exchange via email afterwards. So the last question would be, which perspectives do you see we need to evaluate EbA measures, short, medium, long-term spans? Thank you, Lucy. Yes, Lucy? I think the microphone is not on. Okay, Lucy's gone apparently. So I guess she will come back later, but sorry, Lynn and Martin, we will address your questions perhaps at the very end of the session and to the next presentation from Thailand and it's a very interesting case study on the economic benefits of ecosystem-based adaptation in the water sector. And yeah, there will be an input on a comparison of dredging versus a sediment trap. And with this, I think Roland is in the line. Could you please switch on your microphone?
My name and
yeah.
they will let me say.
Hello? Can
Hello.
everybody hear me? I'm going under chapter 1 because my computer has some problems, so it's my colleague. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we do. Perfectly.
Yes. Okay, good. First of all, I want to apologize my colleague from the partner institution, Department for Water Resources. He cancelled the meeting on a short notice because of an urgent internal meeting. I don't want to explore more about it. It's understandable that he couldn't make it. So I will do the whole presentation. First, it was meant that he is doing the technical part while I take over for the economic part. In Thailand, we started an EbA project almost 4 years ago in 2013. At that time, EbA was not considered at all. People were still stuck with the grey infrastructure, with the technical solutions. Nowadays, it's switched. All the main water organizations are nowadays prioritizing EbA measures. At least they say so. They are still in the technical loop, especially when it comes to the regions. But at least at the national level, there is kind of a paradigm shift in the strategy, in the planning. But it takes time to convey the messages to the provinces. And it's a common sense that EbA always takes time. As we see now in our project, it really takes time to bring the messages to the people, to the actual implementers. Our case study, which I will present, that not always EbA really has only a long-term benefit. You sometimes see an immediate benefit, advantage, or an economic advantage against grey infrastructure, which I will show. Hopefully I can use this. Yeah. So at the beginning, we started with a technical analysis. We have chosen the vulnerability study, which contains about 6 steps. First came the geographical scaling, then scoping. Scoping is identifying the cause and effects of water problems, brainstorming with the people, and we were discussing water issues with the people, with the civil society, as well as with the administration at the national and provincial levels. My colleagues who were sitting next to me, they conducted all these interviews, these talks with the people, and it gave us very good insight and it made us understanding how they think. The third step was the data collection, which is, I think, not only in Thailand a tricky issue. Data are available, but they are scattered, they are hidden in some cases. Departments are not willing to share data because they think it's a lot of power keeping data. So it took us a while to convince them that data only gives you some power if you use them. If you hide them, it does not have any benefit for anyone. The fourth step was the state-of-the-art modeling and planning tools. We hired international consultants together with national consultants, and they were working together with our partners. So in all these steps, our partners were always involved at the provincial and national levels, and further we involved also local consulting companies or universities, mainly universities, I must say. And the fourth and fifth step, after the assessment, we came up with potential measures. And the potential measures, we came up with 5 to 6 measures per river basin. We were working in 3 river basins in total. First we started with 2 river basins, but we added 1 because they liked our approach, so we did something more for the same money. So thank you to my staff that I overloaded them with work sometimes, but now that they have knowledge. I want to focus on the causal chain analysis because that is one of the key tools we have used. Talking to people about water problems, brainstorming with them what could be the possible solutions, opened their mind for new solutions, and they saw that we are talking about climate change effects, but sometimes these climate change effects are accelerated by human being wrong behavior, I would call, or at least by their behavior. Many of the water problems we discussed are man-made, and of course the climate change is increasing the effects, but basically if some behavior could be changed, it would already reduce the risks and vulnerabilities. So if you take a look at this tree, we came up on the left-hand side with land use planning, infrastructure. These are all necessary economic measurements. The people have to generate some income, so that they have to use land. They try to avoid buffer strips between the water body and the agricultural land, and they used every strip of the land for the agricultural purpose, and of course that leads to erosion and sedimentation. and deforestation is changing the land use, and wrong land use is, I would say, the main problem here in Thailand, and I assume not only in Thailand. We saw that in the northeastern part, west of Bangkok, and in the southern part. Everywhere where you go, it's simply wrong land use, which leads to a lot of water problems. If the land use is not properly managed, you increase the peak flows, the flood intensity increases as well as the frequencies, because the land cannot absorb enough water anymore. The stream capacity is reduced, and the resources are lost sometimes. And all these leads to higher damage and maintenance costs. And talking to people and showing them, visualizing the problems, they understand them that actually they have to change their behavior as well. It's nice to have climate change as an excuse, but to avoid climate change effects, they also have to change their behavior, and that was quite tricky. But at the end, it worked out. That they are at least nowadays aware that they are also contributing to the risks and floods. So for the planning of the EbA measures, we developed a tool which the basis for this tool is the Forum for European Natural Water Retention Measures. I think all of you know that. It's a very nice list of possible measures in urban areas, in agricultural sector, in forest, or in the hydrologic, in the water sector. And we quantified these effects and evaluated the effects according to water problems we defined. We have defined 10 water problems which we were tackling with. On the this slide, on the very top left, you see the effects: sedimentation, we had erosion, water drought, flood, water quality. That was the list of 10 water problems we defined. And then the 4 sectors I already mentioned, and we could combine that in any way we wanted to. We can look only at the agricultural, only at the forest, or any combination of it. We can combine agriculture, forest, urban, and so then this tool generates a list of possible measures. And on the right columns, you see the quantification of the relevance of the core problem, which you see on the left top. And then the side effects on water quality, waterborne diseases, management, climate change effect, ecosystems, if you improve the ecosystems around the water body, and the economics, how it could be used in an economic way. So this matrix was the basis to discuss the possible measures with them. Of course, we also looked at the possible location, if there is enough space available, if the people are willing to have this measure. But this came after we came up with this technical analysis. And at the end, after talking to everybody and defining 6 measures for each river basin, we did a cost-benefit analysis, which was already tackled by Lucy. So the cost-benefit analysis has some advantages, but in the communication with the decision makers, I think it's probably not the proper tool to use. We made the experience that there are so many assumptions and so many, you know, the CBA, the cost-benefit analysis, often consists of assumptions, estimations, and upsala. Very sensitive here. Oops. No. Sorry. Yeah. Of estimations and assumptions. So you always end up in a very detailed discussion if the land value in one specific province is 100 euros or 150 or 200 euros. And we lost much of the results or the quantifications in these very detailed discussions. So we tried to find another way to convince the decision makers, and we said, okay, in one of the river basins we have two options. One is the dredging, business as usual, what the Department for Water Resources is doing during the last decades. Or we changed this behavior and we built a sediment trap upstream of the reservoir and reduce the sediment which comes into the reservoir. And we decided to do a cost-effective analysis because we thought it's probably better visualizing and demonstrating the benefits of the EbA measure which we proposed. So at the beginning we did an analysis. What happens if they keep going in the same way? And we found out that every 25 years they have to do the dredging. And without considering inflation rate, without considering economic development, we said every 25 years they have to invest 75 million Thai baht, and still the problem is there, still they are not achieving anything. So instead of doing that, we proposed the sediment trap, which you see in this red square. And the construction for it is rather low compared to the investments they have. The construction is here in Thailand about 750,000 Thai baht, which is about 20,000 euros. And the maintenance costs is about 1,000 euros a month, a year. So at the beginning, day one, we have still the 75 million Thai baht on both sides. If we build the sediment pond or the dredging, we have to do the dredging because the reservoir is filled up. But then comes the advantage of the sediment pond. Because after 25 years, we do not need to invest another 75 million, but only the maintenance costs, which are very low here. We can keep out most of the reservoirs from the, keep out most of the sediment from the reservoir, and the sediment trap is easy to dredge every year. That's not so much work, it's probably 1-2 weeks of dredging maximum. So, and over the time span of 100 years, you generate a lot of cost reduction. Instead of spending 300 million, you actually have less than 80 million Thai baht costs. Again, we did not consider inflation rate and the economic development until then. We have shown them on the left-hand scale, you see the investments, which is 75 million each year. On the right-hand side, you see the water storage capacity of the reservoir, and we calculated it on an average level. So to be able to compare both the dredging and the sediment trap. And on average, you see that at any specific day, the sediment trap provides more water than the dredging, because from day one you reduce the sediment which flows into the reservoir. And with these two numbers, the investments and the water storage, we calculated the average costs for water volume of 1 cubic meter of water. And you see that at the beginning, the price benefit per cubic meter of water is not that big, but it's increasing with time. And after 25 years, you already have almost a 20% higher return of the investments. And over the years, the highest is after 80 years, and it's almost, it's about 75% of cost reduction. So after 80 years, the cost per cubic meter of water is reduced by 75% compared to dredging and business as usual. And that's quite as significant for a public budget, which is not so in such a good shape, I would say, that they also have a huge deficit, and that they have to think about how to finance it in the future. And this water storage, or the reduced or increased water storage capacity, has some effects of the regional economy, which is mainly agriculture. This reservoir is built for irrigating agricultural land. Rice is, as you may know, one of the most common commodities here in Thailand, and many farmers are in this paddy rice production. So we calculated what does it mean if you have less water year by year by not building the sediment trap. And to show it to the farmers how much they lose, we were looking at the whole area, and we found out that out of 4,700 hectares, which are 750 hectares, more than 10% are not effectively used if you do the dredging, even after the first year. And every year you are losing almost 10% of irrigated, no, 1%, not 10%, 1%, sorry. So after 10 years you would not irrigate, or 1%. 1.5% actually. So you are losing areas which you can irrigate from year one, and it's about 10 hectares when you do the dredging, and only 2.5 when you use the sediment pond. And with the sediment trap or pond or pool, as it's mentioned here, there are many terms for it, you are actually, you are actually reducing your yield in these affected areas by 10%. If you calculate it or estimate it in a very conservative way. The effects are between 10 and 30%, and I just saw that there's only one more slide which shows you the 30% reduction. This yield dropping by 30% is only calculated for the affected area. So out of 4,700 rice or 750 hectares, 10 hectares are not irrigated, and this is of the yield on these 10 hectares. And this generates income loss after 5 years of 800,000 Thai baht, which is about 20,000 euros per year. And after 20 years, it's an astonishing 12 million or almost 280,000 euros a year, which the whole area of 750 hectares are losing. The farmers who are working there are actually losing after 20 years 270,000 per year, which is really a big income loss. We also have shown that the reduction of the water storage capacity could affect the number of people you can provide water with. if you use it for domestic purposes. And assuming that the Thais are using 50 liters per day, in year 1 you could provide more water to 780 people per year, and after 80 years, you could provide water to 16,400 people per year, which is, I think, 4 or 5% of the population in this region, which is also quite considerable numbers. So these are our findings. Thank you for your attention, and now I'm looking for, hope everything is clear somehow. If not, please ask.
Okay, thank you very much, Roland, for this presentation. And yeah, thank you very much. Your questions are welcome right now. For those of you who joined the webinar a bit later, how can you engage in the discussion? There's a chat box on the left-hand side, and there you could ask your question. I already see a question. And as Laura is currently doing, you can lift your hand. There are some buttons also on the left-hand side, and I will switch on your microphone. So I see one hand, and Laura, would you please switch on your microphone? You just have to press on the microphone symbol. And I hope your audio is working well. Okay, while trying, I will.
Yes, here now.
Working.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So just a short question. To me, it sounds like more a classical cost-benefit analysis, and I wonder, because EbA is a lot about climate change and to take into account the climate projection for that specific area. So I wonder how this information was included in the analysis, that whether the water, how the water trends in the area are in the next, I don't know, 30 to 40 years and so on. So then it's labeled as adaptation because you adapt to the changing climate which is happening in the next 30 years. So I don't know how you tackled it in the analysis.
Thank you for this very valid question. I'm sorry that I didn't tackle that part. Yes, we did some climate change projection. We did scenario simulations. We were simulating different scenarios. We were communicating all these to our partners. Yeah, I thought I'm focusing on the hands-on tools with which we convinced the people. At the end, the decision makers are convinced by showing the benefits to the farmers here in Thailand. And of course, we brought in the discussion about the climate change. And in all our reports, it's mentioned very prominently that the climate change will have an effect, and all the current water problems will become more and more severe.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And there's another question in the chat box from the Philippines. So the question is, what was the most critical preparatory process you undertook to convince the government's infrastructure or public works agency to consider the sediment pond option?
Well, as we have shown, the sediment trap is reducing the costs. All officials are happy with cost reductions. So we have shown the technical benefits, we have shown the economic benefits, but still it needs some kind of discussion to to convince them that at the end all are winning. If you know what I mean, it's cost effectiveness or reducing costs. It's not always appreciated, especially in the provinces.
Okay. Is there something else, Roland, you would like to add? No, I think it's fine. And also for Doris, she says, thanks, Roland. And yeah, many thanks for this presentation and as well for your questions. And with this, I think we should go on to our next presentation. And this is from Susanna Toll from Wetlands International on communicating evidence, EbA evidence. So Susanna, please.
Hello, everyone. Can you all hear me? Yeah, great. Okay, so I will tell you today about a project which I'm working on together with many different partners, such as the Indonesian government, both the Ministry of Marine Affairs and Fisheries and the Ministry of Spatial Planning. EcoShape platform, which is a collection of engineers, NGOs, knowledge institutes, such as those that you see the logos from on this sheet. So we can call it a public-private partnership with multiple disciplines. The project that we're working on is in Central Java, and specifically in the district of Demak, which is quite a large area in the north coast. This area has a heavily degraded muddy mangrove coastline. So there used to be mangroves along the coastline, but most of them have been degraded now. And the result is that hundreds of kilometer coasts suffer from severe erosion. And you see some figures here on this sheet from the district of Demak. The erosion affects around 70,000 people, and it has caused income loss already of 60 to 80%, and these are mostly the sectors of aquaculture and agriculture. In total, around 1,000 hectares of land have already been swallowed by the sea, and 6 kilometers inland flooding is expected. For the future, there's also a new threat, which is sea level rise, which is also expected to be quite high, so has to be incorporated in long-term planning. The main causes of the erosion in this area are the disturbance of the sediment balance. You can see on the next sheet what amount of land has already been lost. So you see the black line from 2003 at the coastline, and then the purple line, that's 2013. So in 10 years' time, in some places, 3 kilometers of land have been lost. Main causes are mangrove conversion to aquaculture, so the ponds have been built at the coastline. Another cause is river canalization, so coming from the inland. It used to be meandering, and now it's just canals, which disturbs sediment coming from inland. Groundwater extraction is a very important issue, which causes land subsidence, and coastal infrastructure that blocks sediment flows from the sea is another big problem. You see that a lot of the like aquaculture ponds at the coastline have turned into very big lakes, so everything is now unproductive basically, and people have to leave the area. If business as usual would continue, then basically the entire area would be flooded under 2030. So that's the business as usual scenario. Traditional solutions have been tried in this area, hard infrastructure like seawalls, etc., but they turned out to increase the erosion force and disturb the sediment balance, and they even collapsed. So there was a clear need for a change of paradigm, and we introduced here a concept called building with nature, which means that you use the forces of nature. What do we do in this area? We are halting coastal erosion by regenerating natural, like mangroves, in a natural way. We do that by restoring the sediment balance. On the left on this picture you see permeable dams in front of the coastline. They dampen the waves and causing a more quiet environment inside the grids. And there the sediment can then settle. And there are many mangrove seeds floating around there, and they can then settle, and the mangroves are already regrowing. I think you can see behind the dams some green spots. This is already a bit of a dated picture, so it's already more now. Under a new funding coming from IKI, we can now also address river restoration to ensure that we address the canalization issue and to address subsidence. But these are things that we haven't yet started up. So it's an example of small-scale engineering. So it says hard engineering, but that's actually means I have to say soft engineering, because we're using local materials which are familiar by the communities there. They are actually helping to build them under supervision of an engineering company, which is Witteveen and Bos. A very important issue is that we also introduce sustainable aquaculture. This is because it's a huge economic motor for the local economy, and we want to, of course, avoid that we go back to the business as usual situation in a few years' time. This is a picture of some coastal field schools that we do to introduce such in sustainable aquaculture. It's a problem that applies to a large part of the coastline. So it's not just the district of the MAC, but it's along hundreds of kilometers. So this is typically a pilot that has potential to scale up. And you can see our ambition expressed in this figure. The building with nature philosophy and applications can be applied to both rural areas and urban settings. Basically, there is, like, within every setting is a building with nature possibility. We show what we do in the MAC, and we invest in capacity building, enable policies, and stimulating replication in other areas, both in Indonesia as in other areas with muddy tropical coastlines, and also in other types of settings. So now I will talk about specifically about the role of communications within this project. The role of communications is actually twofold. First of all, it's focused on the project area, and secondly, it is focused on scaling up and replication. So first on the project area, the objective of communications is to gain support for the pilot, especially because it's a flagship that we would like to have replicated somewhere else. It's extremely important to show that we are supported by local stakeholders, including the communities. We have a lot of dialogue for input and joint vision development. We are addressing concerns and questions, and we also activate project stakeholders for support in mainstreaming, for instance by developing village plans and village regulations. For scaling up, the main objective is to generate interest and trust in the project and in the partners, and to stimulate sound replication. It also means that we have to prevent adoption of the measures in the wrong setting. You cannot put permeable dams everywhere. You have to do a very good system analysis before the measures are chosen. But because it's a very visible measure, there is the risk that it will be replicated in the wrong setting. So this is an important part of our implementation guidance and capacity building. Communications also supports the integration of building with nature approach in policy. And for instance, the spatial plan of the MAC, coastal management plan in Central Java, but also national DRR and adaptation plans. The scale of communications focuses on 3 different locations. The Netherlands, because that's the donor country, and now also Germany, by the way. The Dutch water sector is represented in the partners, and we use this project also as an example to influence replication elsewhere through the Dutch water sector. In Indonesia, as mentioned, in the project area and in the public and private water sector. And globally, we present the project at adaptation and disaster risk reduction conferences, for instance, water sector, to generate demand for replication. You see a photo here from November where there was a Dutch trade mission visited the Building with Nature project area in Indonesia. We have a couple of core values that we use in our communications activities, and I will go through each of them. This forms the core of the choices we make in terms of communications. First of all, because it's an innovative project in a complex area, we want to take stakeholders along with us in the entire project process, and we do that by showing progress, by inviting people to come to the site, by using nice imagery, by writing expert insights, for instance through blogs and stories. We have many different perspectives because we work with multiple disciplines and different types of partners. So we show the each of them their perspectives. And a second very important value is transparency, because it's quite an innovative approach and quite a challenging project. We feel that we have to manage high expectations, and there are of course also limits to the approach. So therefore a key value is to communicate honestly and regularly on the challenges and on the lessons, for instance, and how we deal with that. We also are transparent about risks that are not under our control, for instance, very extreme weather, or if, for instance, mangroves are converted again in another area where we have been restoring, we have to go into dialogue about that. Challenges that already happened, for instance, include that some of the permeable dams collapsed. And then, we are trialing different methods and materials, so to improve along the way. By sharing that, others can benefit from that and see how we are learning by doing. Another challenge is, for instance, that in some areas people have to give up their aquaculture ponds to reconvert to mangroves. We are investing in alternative livelihoods or in ponds behind the mangroves, but it's of course a challenge to get people along with you and to give that up for a while. Expertise, it's both from the partners as well as from the local stakeholders. We are getting a lot of input through dialogue. And so they are also the experts along with the partners of the project. We invest a lot in sharing lessons learned, in turning that into implementation guidance through publications, but also through capacity building, training, and share best practice. Because we aim for a paradigm shift, we feel that we have to take all the stakeholders along with you. So again, making use of dialogue, showing different perspectives, and also making sure that our information is easily accessible. For instance, we have field facilitators in the project areas. They are on a continuous basis communicating to the communities and who are the beneficiaries. We have a local office there. What is key is that it's not just a technical solution, but yeah, we work on long-term solutions, so also socio-economic measures have to be emphasized. And so also to avoid returning back to business as usual. So to recap a couple of things that we emphasize in communications. The facts and figures in terms of the beneficiaries, how that is distributed over different beneficiaries, and costs, benefits, and impacts on the economy, which links closely to Lucy's presentation. It's very important to emphasize the root causes of erosion and to express that there's a joint responsibility to avoid the consequences of business as usual. There are multiple benefits. It's not only coastal safety, but there are also benefits for the local economy, which is currently suffering so much, but also for biodiversity, climate change mitigation, and adaptation. Compared to business as usual, or compared to traditional approaches, this approach is very flexible and adaptive to changes, for instance from climate change. Which is something that we also emphasize because you have to compare to traditional approaches. And we find this a very nice project example of an integrated approach with multiple disciplines, which is a topic that is also globally very much discussed, looking for good examples of how you do that in practice. Another emphasis is that the solutions are very site-specific, yeah, you cannot just simply replicate, but you take the ingredients and do a good system analysis and see what to apply where. These are some of the products that we either already have made or are still going to develop. We have the business plan, or like the design and engineering plan. It's just publicly available, so it shows all the steps of our approach, all the assumptions, also the identified risks. So this really adds to transparency. We will make it's currently being developed an implementation guide, for instance, on how do you build such permeable dams, but also how do you work on sustainable aquaculture. We are working on like a really nice visual on the change from business as usual to our dream scenario, because we believe that if you see it, then it can really help you understand why this scenario is benefiting so much more than the business as usual scenario. We're working on macroeconomic analysis of the cost and benefits of the approach and how these are distributed. And scenarios of optimized sustainable aquaculture. So far, we are two years underway. We've had a lot of very good media coverage in the Dutch and Indonesian water sector, especially in the Netherlands. Yeah, we keep on being asked about articles and yeah. In the Indonesian water sector, this is growing as well, especially, for instance, with the Dutch trade mission that went to the project area in November. We have a lot of different partners with different stakeholders, such as the engineers, consultants, contractors, government, NGOs, knowledge institutes. So through our own partner communication channels, we already have very nice outreach. We have also invested in a very good overview of personal contacts, and we keep them very regularly updated. So I think that's a key part as well. And not only updated, but also invite them for joint vision development. We had some successful mini campaigns, as we call that, for instance, on the topic of mangrove restoration, which we do not do by planting, but only by stimulating natural regeneration, so restoring the sediment balance, and by that restoring the mangroves. which is an important topic in the mangrove community. So on those kind of topics we also draw attention to the project. And yeah, every time we have formal visits by authorities, there is a lot of attention, like last week when the steering committee gathered, and it was a nice article again in the Indonesian newspapers. Some important factors to focus on for next years is to continue working on credibility. We get more and more monitoring results, so we will also share them. We focus on how we learn from that, what are the challenges and our solutions. We have to continue working on visibility in the project district, not only where the project is actually taking place, but also in that wider district. Yeah, now we have some good results. We can increase our engagement with the Indonesian water sector. For instance, we are developing a building with nature platform in Indonesia with representatives from the different sectors. So that is a very good tool for engagement with the Indonesian water sector. And yeah, lobby and advocacy will focus more and more on the national agenda. We have another project that links closely to this, which is called Partners for Resilience, which is a collaboration between Red Cross, Cordate, CARE, Climate Center and Wetlands International, and that we focus very much at the national policy agenda, which also link to the global policy frameworks. So yeah, it's a nice collaboration between different projects. So this was my contribution on communications. There's a lot to say, of course, about this. I hope this gives you some insight on how, yeah, on our approaches and how we work. And I look forward to some questions from your side.
Yeah, thank you very much, Susanna, for this very interesting presentation. And I can already see the first question in the chat box. So there's a question from Hannah. Thank you, Susanna. Much of your presentation emphasized communicating what you are doing to local people instead of working with them. Local development / environment projects are always more sustainable when designed and implemented with local people. For example, they have a key role in identifying challenges and appropriate solutions instead of just being considered as project recipients. So I was wondering if you adopted this approach anywhere in your project and if this affected sustainability.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. Yeah, maybe I didn't emphasize it enough, but it's actually a very important part of our communications. We both work with the communities as our partners, so we engaged with local stakeholders in developing the vision and the solutions. They are implementing part of the project, for instance, the building of the dams under supervision, but also in developing village plans, which then also look at sustainability of the solutions. So the communications is very regular with communications. We have many village dialogues, village meetings. So I couldn't agree with you more. I hope this answers your question.
Thank you very much for your answer, Susanna. And there's another question from Lucy. Thank you, Susanna. That was a very interesting and a very nice case study for hybrid grey-green EbA measures. And the question is, who is financing the coastal protection measures and how will they be financed over long term? Will they be sustainable in terms of funding?
Okay. Yeah. First of all, this communications, this presentation is about communications, not so much about financing. So I cannot answer all questions, maybe, but I will try. First of all, we are currently being funded by the Dutch government, and we have additional funding now from the German government. That is to implement this pilot. But there is a whole finance plan behind it to make it sustainable in the longer term. This is included in the village regulations. The idea is that when the aquaculture that is being developed in a sustainable way is successful, then that can partly be invested in maintenance of mangroves. And then let me see what else I can say about this. I think the business case will have to make the case how replication can be interesting for the Indonesian water sector. So there, hopefully, we will generate new investments. Then the integration into policy is another important factor. For instance, building with nature is now included in the spatial planning policy of the MAC, and so that will also facilitate maintenance.
Mm-hmm. Many thanks for this. And there's a comment from the Philippines: big yes to village plans and dialogue, but of interest also is the engineering design and that of the permeable dams. And a final question from Jaruan: what is the time span for the materials which trap the sediments?
Okay, Dolores, I don't really see a question.
I think it's more a comment.
Oh, okay. Yes, so then I go to the question by Jarivan. What is the time span for the materials which trap the sediments? Basically, after a number of years, you will see that the sediment balance has restored enough and that mangroves regenerate naturally. It's a temporary measure, so they will not remain there. Mangroves at some point will take over, and basically they will probably be buried in the sediment. But I think the time spent for the materials can also be a question on how, when do you need to rebuild them, because it's a material that it's not like hard infrastructure. It's different kind. We use bamboo, for instance, and so we have to replace them every now and then. So we are now calculating how often we need to rebuild them against what costs. And some methods can last for like 2 years, others have to be replaced every year. But still, compared to hard infrastructure, which hasn't been successful or effective, but compared to that, the materials are also very, very cheap.
Okay, thank you very much, Susanna, for this. I think this was the final question. And with this, we come to the end of our webinar session for today. Thank you very much to all presenters for your very interesting inputs and for the very good questions. With this, I think we can close today's session. As I mentioned, it is within a discussion series of 3 webinars, and we still have 1 webinar for 6th of April. I will send around the invitation in brief, and it will be posted on Adaptation Community Net as well. The recordings of this webinar will be made available and be uploaded on Adaptation Community Net. Well, many thanks for all of you, and also thanks to BMUB IKI, which made possible this webinar, and the good collaboration with UN Environment and REGATTA and Practical Action and their EbA Community of Practice. And looking forward to meeting you in April, 6th of April. Thank you very much.